It's our Watches and Wonders Deep Dive Part 2. The watches we saw, the people we met, and our take on the world's largest watch show. Welcome to the Scottish Watches podcast. This is the second edition. This is part 2 of 2, but don't worry, because unlike episodic things and serials, you don't have to listen to the prior episode for this one to make sense. Not that we're ever going to make sense, Dave. We're here to talk about watches, Geneva, everything that happened in Switzerland over the last week or thereabouts, and we've already covered quite a lot of stuff that happened in the first couple of days that were there, and we're going to get right into the next batch of appointments starting on Wednesday morning.
We hit Raymond Weil, a brand that we've talked about in this show quite a lot because you actually bought one.
Yeah, my first ever turquoise watch, and the watch that kind of led to a chat where we spoke to the guys in the UK about coming onto the show. Everything was agreed, and then the trail went a little bit cold. We kind of get things back up and running thanks to Chloe at the PR agency. Had a great meeting with the folks there, and the watches they showed were pretty damn decent. I believe this was the first year they were exhibiting at Watches and Wonders, and their stand, or display stand, looked impressive. There's another brand we'll talk about later on, but the guys at Raymond Weil, fantastic. The watch that stuck out to me that I hadn't seen before was one where they'd utilised a cartoon character or a comic book character that's quite famous over the water in the continent. I had to look online, I had to look on their website, and I had to look in their Instagram, and I couldn't actually find out anything about this, who this character was, but it was emblazoned all across the stand, and it featured on the clear case back that was no longer clear on one of their new releases.
Quite a few of that sector dial kind of esque look to them. Yeah, as you mentioned, a bit like Patek, a bit like kind of Longines as well. Quite a few sub-second models, and definitely a theme of these kind of sand colour, light green taupe type colour palettes going on as well, which definitely seems to have a bit of a flavour with a few of the brands. I really liked some of their releases. Definitely looks like they're beginning to push themselves a little bit up market from where they were, albeit that at still extremely competitive price points, very accessible, great looking watches.
And talking about GLC, that's where we ended up next. And it's always something we look forward to when we go across to Geneva, because the presenter that we get in the English part, because they divide it up by different territories and different languages. So you have the French-speaking nations, you've got the Germans, you've got the Asian markets, and we always end up either in the international or the UK. And when we go in, it's always the same presenter. And he's always got the same mannerisms, and he knows all about the watches. I don't know if he's one of the watch designers, one of the creators, one of the engineers, or one of the watchmakers, but he knows everything that's going on, and he delivers it with such a comedic flair that we should bring him onto the show at some point. But they had a number of new releases. They always show something cool, like a gyro tourbillon or something like that. And this time around, they had a number of heavy hitters.
And yes, you're absolutely right. I would even go with a slight hint of sarcasm to some of his deliveries, which is always quite fun, especially when he comes to talk about the very expensive pieces, where he says, yes, expensive, when he's asked what the price is, which always does amuse me. Indeed, they have the Duometre Helio Tourbillon Perpetual, now there's a mouthful for you, or the Duometre Chronograph Moon, or the Duometre Quatre Time Lunaire. Lots of high-end, super high-end complications going on with those guys. They always use Watches and Wonders to roll out their watchmaker type credentials and show what they can really do when it comes to movement technology, because these guys are no slouches in that department. If you like the aesthetic, that's one thing, but you can never ever push anything against them when it comes to their movement technology developments. So yes, check out the show notes for some beautiful pictures of some rather lovely GLCs.
Came out of there into something completely different, polar opposite. We went to Piaget, and they are the masters of thinness. Although they were pipped at the post, well, maybe not, because Richard Mille had kind of lifted that crown, but they'd been double pipped at the post recently because Bulgari had released something that was incredibly, incredibly thin. But these guys turned it on its head, because they had, it looked like a capsule or something like that, where they had a tourbillon inside a tiny, tiny little cage, inside a super, super thin watch.
2 millimeters, to be precise, is the thickness of this watch. I believe, whilst it's not the thinnest watch in the world, I think possibly Bulgari have just taken that crown. I believe it may be the thinnest watch in the world that features a tourbillon, although I stand to be corrected in that, but I think that was what I read somewhere in some of their bumf. Very cool looking watch. Considering how thin it was, it did feel sturdy. Maybe not a word I would use with a 2 millimeter thick watch often, but it did have a feeling of substantiality to it, something that wouldn't just break on use. And in fact, if I remember correctly, it also was waterproof to 100 metres, which makes it very utilitarian for day-to-day use, unlike maybe some of the other very thin watches which might get a bit of a fright if they even were to hear the word water.
And big props to Piaget because they let us actually play with the watch. And we weren't getting any special treatment. All the press, all the journalists that were there for all these touch and feel events, they got similar access, as did we. So this thing was getting passed around, it was getting tried on, there was wrist shots getting taken left, right and centre. So they were putting their money where their mouth was by letting people actually access this rather than putting it in a glass case where nobody could get near it. Apart from that, I believe they were celebrating their 150th anniversary, a great accolade, a great milestone, and they had other watches to check out, including that really cool looking Venetian blind styled Piaget in gold that got released earlier on, maybe a few months back.
That was the Polo 79, a watch that made the rounds in the news cycles, probably as you mentioned, a couple of months back, but this was the first time most people will have got to actually handle it and see it in person. A substantial lump of gold it was as well, almost the opposite of that 2mm thick watch that we were looking at just before it. It was extremely light, it was extremely thin. This is a bit chunkier. Not ridiculously thick, but certainly weighty on the wrist. And I must correct myself, not 100 metres water resistance on the tourbillon, 20 metres guaranteed though. Doesn't sound that much, but it is still significantly better than most. And yes, that Polo 79, impressive. Is it my favourite kind of reconstructed gold watch from the past? Nope, I think that still for me falls to the Vacheron, but it was definitely up there in the ones that I would quite like to have in my collection.
So from that crazy, clonky, chunky, funky number, right the way down to your 2mm Altiplano Ultimate Concept Tourbillon. Fantastic watches. The next port of call, no pun intended, was at Panerai. And we've been in the past to their booths, and it's always been quite dark and murky, almost as if you actually are under the sea. And there was no Little Mermaids kicking around, there was no Ariels, or Ariel Adams as it turns out, but we had a great presentation with a lot of new releases. They were all tied in with Luna Rossa, they were all tied in with this new thing that seems to be going around. It's as if the ceramic titanium box of tricks has been opened up, the toy box, and all the little brands are allowed to go and play in it.
I think possibly one of the brands in the Richemont stable forgot to lock up the doors of the safe one evening, and maybe all their brothers and sisters were in raiding their toys, because as Ricky says, there were many titanium ceramized type materials doing the rounds, very specifically within a set of companies who maybe have a big brother that's very good with materials, but we're only surmising on that. That said, yes, a bright and breezy stand, you get that bit of sailing. The Luna Rossa is one of these crazy ass looking boats that go shooting around the world at ridiculous speeds, and Panerai very much talking about their collaboration with them, in many ways the same as Omega in the past, and Tudor are currently pushing their whole narrative with Alinghi. So sailing seems to be a theme with a few of the brands. Yes, this watch was interesting, not my favourite Panerai, it has to be said, but pretty cool nonetheless.
And if you didn't like the look of that, then you had 31 choices at Nomos. Nomos Glashut. They were there, I don't know if it was the first time they'd been there. There was a lot of brands. This was their first entry to PAL Expo, either with SIHH or Watches and Wonders. But this was like walking into a fashion store. It was, I wouldn't like to say, but I will say an upmarket swatch store, the way they had things laid out. And obviously all the watches are mechanical and fantastic. In-house movement, left, right and centre. But these 31 colours, they went to great extremes and great lengths to explain why they were chosen, how they worked. And they had the biggest LED display screen where they could actually show you all the different colours in the one go. You could pick one and it would blow up to massive size. So that was good to check out, and also to actually handle those watches. And they'd opened their stand up, so half of it was very bright and breezy, and then the other half opened to the rafters, so there was actually good airflow and it cooled things down a little bit.
That was Nomos' first time at the show, and they came in with a bang, really only exhibiting one of their models, albeit, as Ricky mentioned, in 31 very different colour combinations, ranging from the sublime and gentle and very office wearable through to the punch-in-the-face colour schemes. All exactly the same model though, and coming in at a very reasonable, if I remember correctly, €1,900 each, including taxis. So they've really opened it up. In fact, if I remember correctly, these models are fractionally cheaper than the regular model in the regular colour of the same model. So yes, doing something a little bit different, and you're right, a posh watch store is a good description. Lots of bright funky colours, all based around the same look and feel, but I'm sure pretty much everybody could find something they liked.
The only problem you had there was a little bit of analysis paralysis. There were too many good colours, because you said to me, what's your favourite? And I picked 1, 2, 3, 4. And I wouldn't be buying 4 of the same watch. And I wouldn't want to buy one because I might feel as if I've left out the other. So they might run into difficulties in that front, but no, the whole collection, the way that all the colours work together with their design language, it was a big win. And I think they did phenomenally well because it was always packed, not just with people like me and Dave coming in on the journalistic side, but with retailers and people looking to find out more about the brand, perhaps to stock it or purchase them in the future. We moved from there to Chrono Swiss. We always visit them every year because we like their box of delights. And this year, they weren't showing us their purple-headed monster. They showed us their green monster.
The reconfiguration of the Resec range. They had two. They had the green monster and they had the vertical blue. Now, both of these are superb looking watches. They did start off by saying, you know, we are pretty good at doing the whole colour thing and high decoration, especially with the kind of guilloche patterns that they're good at cutting. In fact, they had their guy again on the stand with his machine cutting away at pieces of metal as everyone was looking at the watches. But before they showed us those bright pieces, they did bring out their new sub €10,000 watch, which was very impressive and in a much more subtle colour scheme, black and gold, with an in-house manufacture movement in there as well. So yes, some cool things coming, and that green monster. I was the green-eyed monster because I really wanted to take it home with me.
It's a brand that I've loved since we first met the guy. I think it's Oliver, the guy's name, the CEO, over at Dubai Watch Week 2.5 years ago, and I love what they do. I love the purple haze. We actually got sent that to play with, and it was a real pain in the ass having to send it back. Just the way they work with things, the way they create their dials. I've looked at the pictures and the videos that we took, and we could not capture what the eyeball sees in real life. So if you ever get the opportunity to see these guys at an atelier, at a showroom, anywhere across the world, then definitely go and have a look because they're massively impressive. They do have dealers across the place. We bumped into Lewis from CW Sellers, Dura Watches, and I actually said to him, we've not had any complaints about his company for a wee while, so they must be doing something right. I believe they sell those watches. So there's distant selling regulations and things in the UK, so you can always have a wee look and return it if you don't like it. Not that I'm saying you should do that, but you could. Next up was Cyrus. Now, this was an appointment we booked, but we couldn't make. So we had to find an opportunity to come back later on, but we'll talk about it just now. And it's a brand we spoke to last year, and it was like, yeah, cool, nice watches. Little bit Richard Mille, little bit this, little bit that. Their dice is quite famous. It's like 2 independent chronograph movements in the one watch. Pushers on each side. You can time 2 cars, you can time 2 whatever you like. This time around, they had something a little bit different, and this was a double tourbillon arrangement, and a little bit like the marquetry UN that we saw at Geneva Watch Days last year. They'd hidden all the cool stuff away from the hands, away from the top of the dial, but it still worked. Reminded me of some of the Jacobin Co's, but where the Jacobin Co's have got double tourbillons, they kind of skit around a little bit. They're a little bit jerky. That's not a smooth motion to them. It looks odd, and if I paid that amount of money, I'd be a little bit upset about things. Whereas on this, everything seemed to work properly. There was no staccato movement, there was no staggering or stuttering or anything like that, and the execution of it was absolutely flawless. This was just something that blew my mind. I don't know if you actually got an opportunity to come and have a look, Dave, but if you did, what are your thoughts on this?
I got a quick glance at it. This is the Ethereal Twin Orbital Tourbillon, a watch that took them apparently 6 years, or should I say it took their master watchmaker 6 years to develop. Lots of things going on here. You have jumping hours, you have the minute indication, you have the 2 flying tourbillons changing position, and everything seemed to be quite readable, which for a watch with so many things going on, was maybe a bit of an oxymoron, but it certainly seemed to work. And yes, as you mentioned, they've got lots of watches from different kind of genres and feelings and vibes about them, but this is a heavy hitter, no two ways about it.
Limited to 18 pieces, it's going to cost you 330,000 Swiss francs, which is a lot of cash, but compared to Jacob & Co., compared to Gribble Forze, compared to high-end MB&F, and that kind of stratospheric level of watchmaking, I think it's decent. I think it's probably worthwhile. Not that I'm ever going to play in that ballpark, ever, but it's nice to dream now and again, and that is one of my top picks for the year. Moving on from there to perhaps the biggest grail watch company on the planet, and a bit of a coup for us, Dave, and it's all thanks to potentially someone that you can name.
Felix, one of my friends, he works at Patek and he was actually at the show this year. He sent me a little message with a couple of pictures of what was happening in the Patek stand, and I cheekily said, might you be able to spare 10-15 minutes to let two idiots from Scotland come in and have a little look around? And he said, unfortunately, not today, but maybe tomorrow. We asked him on the Tuesday, we let us in on the Wednesday, and we got to have a look around. Now, I spent time with Felix walking around, hearing what was to be said, whilst Ricky was buried in a camera taking photographs. So make sure you check out the show notes to see those beautiful photographs that Ricky was taking. Nonetheless, we also managed to sneak a third person in as well, that being Philo, who was doing the rounds with us, and we got to see a couple of the big hitters that they are releasing. My favourite pick of all was the golden ellipse with the black onyx dial, and I think that has also maybe piqued a certain Philo's interest, as it's suddenly been added to his list of I want to have that watch in my collection, so he better be keeping things quiet from his good lady, or else she will be throwing him out on his ear again.
I had a look at the releases because I was getting the pictures and the video as Dave was having the tour and everything explained, but nothing jumped out to me as something I thought, oh yeah, I want it. In the Patek range, the Aquanaut is something I quite like in orange, potentially in the green. Not a big Nautilus fan, it never really did appeal to me as much as various other watches in the range did or didn't. The one that did stand out was a very gold coloured sparkly purple number, and I don't know if it's unisex, I don't know if it's male or female, but that was probably my pick of the litter. And they also had these kind of strange enamel picture watches with surf dudes on them and things, which I thought was a little bit strange, but they stood out and they actually did picture extremely well.
So after Patek, we were off to Mont Blanc for our first big gig of the whole show, which is where we were going to be co-hosting the live broadcast with Simon Weir from Mont Blanc, who was going to be talking to the global audience of people who weren't able to get to Geneva to the show.
That was it. That was the end of the night, so I went for a good sleep. Dave got a good sleep, and we were up, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed for the next day.
Then it was set up for second big recording of the show, that being a recording with Chris Granger, the CEO of IWC. We had a room. We had to set room up.
Just like Simon, just like Christian at Vacheron, these guys are so good at what they do that you can throw anything at them and they will just work with it on the spot, live, no edits, no rehearsals. They're just that good. And we hit the road running. We recorded for about 40-45 minutes, went through some of the information on the new releases. We talked about the fact that prior to that, he was explaining the architectural design of PAL Expo and where they'd gone wrong.
He did spend some time discussing about the, I think we say the fire security hazards, that if anything was to ever burn in that environment, it would truly burn quickly. And he had scoped out all of the fire escapes. So a man with a sense, and showing you how down to earth Chris is, he rocked up and his first words were, would anyone like a coffee? And then proceeded to make people coffee. So Chris showing what a down to earth, great fun guy he actually is. Yes, he is the big boss at that brand, but he truly is a man of the people.
And another gentleman we should talk about is Xavier from Czapek. We were actually the launch partner for their latest releases, the Promenade in multicolours, plus a few changes to the lineup when it comes to the Antarctique and precious metal. That episode went out on the Monday just before the show, and I don't think people expected that to come out just as everybody was getting ready for Watches and Wonders, but we got to see the watches in real life. We got to catch up with Valeria, who had been orchestrating all the back and forth between me and the team at Czapek to get the recordings done. But seeing these watches, again, is something we constantly say, and you're tired hearing it, but it's so true. There are watches that look good in renders and look shit on the wrist, and then there are watches that look okay in renders and look phenomenal on the wrist. Promenade is a watch that looks amazing on the wrist.
Vibes of being youthful and throwing stones into that still pond and watching the rings run out from that. Yeah, great looking watch, lovely size. A slightly unexpected release, maybe a bit of a departation from the Antarctiques that they have probably been best known for over the last couple of years. And for me, a refreshing and very nice departure as well.
The blue dial with those concentric rings is my favourite, and I did ask, and obviously time has moved on slightly, but I did ask if any were still available at the point you recorded with them at that presentation, and they said there were still some available. So if you have a local dealer, of which I know in the UK there are a number, get in touch, because the price point's lower than you expect. That's something Xavier did talk about on the show, and it is incredible. Absolutely incredible looking. But from there, what did we do next?
We then headed over to Ulysse Nardin, possibly one of the funkiest and funnest, if that's such a word, stands of the whole show. Something you can get quite interactive with, and as we found out later, you can definitely get interactive with that movement if you wish to.
This is something they have done for a number of years. Last year we went to the Touch and Feel event, and they had a massive freak movement in the centre of their stand. They upped their game this time around because they took a different freak movement, a bigger freak movement, and created it in 3 dimensions where people could hang on it, lie under it, crawl under it, take selfies, and there was a big massive mirror that reflected so you could actually film yourself and do all that kind of crazy fun stuff. But we had an appointment. We met up with Matthew, and we were going to talk about not just what had been announced, which was the S Nomad. We were going to be talking about a whole load of things and some stuff that's coming out later in the year, because if we record content just now, even if it's embargoed, it means it's sitting ready, it's in the can, then we can release that and have all that stuff to go as soon as we're allowed to. We were just about to record, and then there was a tremor. You know, in Jurassic Park, let's call back to Jurassic Park again. Remember in Jurassic Park where there's a cup of water and it starts to ripple? A bit like a promenade dial. Well, that happened. Do you know why that happened?
And who walked into the room? None other than Nico, ranting and raving in only the way that Nico can do.
We used to call Dave horological herpes because you couldn't get rid of him. Turns out, Nico has taken the crown. Plonked himself down, started to talk and rant about things. The reason I mentioned the whole Jurassic Park thing and the wobbles and the waves was because I was trying to film on the table, and Nico was bouncing into it and banging on it and stamping on it, and I couldn't get a proper shot of those new watches. So in a couple of months' time, when you hear us talk about them and you see that the footage is a little bit shaky, cast your mind back to what we're talking about today. But I get my own back in Nico. I convinced him, or forced him against his will, to appear on video with Matthew talking about the new watch. A little bit uncomfortable. Don't think he wanted to do that, but if he's going to mess up my meeting, he's going to get involved in it.
And then from there to a brand that you will have heard about on the show in the past, Norqain, one of the newer brands to the Swiss fleet of brands. Norqain doing a few funky things themselves, especially with their Nortec carbon-based materials. We got to see some of the punchier colours that had also broken through just before the show started, that being a bright green, almost lime green colour, and one that they call, I believe, coral. Maybe it looks a little more orange in pictures than it does in real life, but for me, I believe the green one was for myself. They also talked about their new, what would we call it, custom configurator, where within reason, you can pretty much configure one of their watches to whichever way you wish.
The Gecko Green is a winner, but like you say, you can now configure using an online system, although in their booth, they had a transparent, translucent OLED screen, which I'd heard about and saw pictures of from CES this year, but I've never seen in real life. And yeah, you could pretty much see through the back of it. They had that there, where you could configure the case, the bracelet, the colour of this, the colour of the shock absorber, the hands, the movement colour, the plate colours, put it all together. There were like billions and billions of different combinations, and then order your specific watch. So you could play with that there. And for them coming along and this being the first time attending the show, their stand for being brand new was the best of the new stands because they had a bar where they were making mule drinks. They had this base camp thing set up, and a little bit like Moonraker. They had these little pods where the meetings were getting taken, but on the outside, it looked like those domes that you saw in Moonraker on the moon with all the kind of hexagon parts to it. Absolutely fantastic. Got to meet up with Ben and the team there. They actually had one of their brand ambassadors across there, Stan, who is a Grand Slam winner. He was there posing for pictures and videos, and we got to see all the watches and get some great video clips.
That would be Stan Wawrinka, who is a very competent tennis player, as you mentioned, having won some Grand Slams.
Notice how I avoided the second name because I didn't know how to pronounce it instead of making an arse of it like you. But anyway, on from there, popped in to see Gerald Charles. We did a show with them last year. They had potentially the funkiest bracelet release system that we have seen since Formex.
A beautiful bracelet. Normally, a butterfly clasp is a great way to hide the join so that it looks like there is in fact no clasp, but usually two little buttons sticking out give it away. In this case, they've managed to integrate those release buttons into the links of the bracelet itself, and in actual fact, it's so well hidden that we thought you just had to give it a good yank, and possibly if we'd pulled harder, we might have had it broken, until they said, no, push the link, and as you push the link, pop, open, up it became. Very cool little design. Not so often that you see little details like that. It occasionally pops up. I do remember back in the day when Czapek entered a little adjustable link into the end of their Antarctic bracelets. A bit like that. A little bit of a brain fart moment where I thought, very clever indeed.
So it was good to catch up with them. That's another good episode to go and check out if you've not already heard it in our past. They had some new releases, links will be in the show notes, pictures will be in there, and they had some cool different dial arrangements, plus obviously this bracelet that we're talking about. So they're doing great things, and we look forward to seeing what they do next. Then we ended the day on a high with Cartier. This is something that happens a lot. Every year when we meet up with those folks, they really do take care of us. We'd accidentally booked ourselves into the international version, and we got an email through from the UK team saying, hey, do you want us to shift you into this one? So we did. We went in, we set up, and the problem had been in the past when we'd been there over different years that journalists loved the watches so much they would hog them. And this was a real problem. And other folks in the room just didn't get the opportunity to wear the watches, try the watches, picture the watches, etc. We knew this was an issue. We didn't want to cause a fuss or a hassle or a problem. So we quickly set up in the corner, and when the watches came to us, we used a little trick. When we got the watch in front of us to record the video clips, we recorded them in slow motion, which meant we only recorded for 10 seconds, but we can double to 20 seconds.
We had Ricky working like he was on a car production line, boshing those watches through, and barely had they entered one end of his little micro studio he'd set up, they were passing out the other end, as if nobody had noticed he'd taken some video.
I loved the Santos de Cartier that came out at the Jewel time, and funnily enough, it was the bejeweled pieces again, just like last year. It was the crazy ones that I hadn't seen or wouldn't have paid any attention to because they're not in my wheelhouse. But those are the ones that stood out, and those are the ones that I got the best video clips of because I was obviously paying so much attention to them. But yet again, Nico wasn't in the room, but there were people kind of jostling around and bouncing the table. So the video clips were great, but they weren't perfect. Next year, I have an idea, but I'm going to keep that under my hat.
And that rounded out again the Thursday at Watches and Wonders itself. Thursday night was also party night in Geneva, where Watches and Wonders had put on many different outside of Palexpo events, concerts and various different events in the boutiques. And funnily enough, right outside the UN boutique was a massive stage having concerts, which meant that half of Geneva had descended on that very street, and getting to the door of the UN boutique before we even got in proved to be a bit of a challenge. But we, hardy Scots, got to the door and got ourselves in.
We knew there was free alcohol inside, and that's all we needed to know. That's all our historic ancestral DNA needed to know. Saw Asma, saw all the team there from LM, all the crew. We even caught up with Andrew Morgan. He was there along with Tim, Kate, Rob, just tons and tons of good folks, and we accidentally ended up in the middle of the biggest fiasco Switzerland has ever seen in the watchmaking industry. We get involved in a photo shoot with an Invicta watch, potentially the most beautiful watch in the world. Philippe Dufour got involved in this. Loads of people, everybody Anybody that's anybody got involved in this thing on Instagram over the last couple of weeks, and we did too. We probably did it a little bit worse than everybody else. From there, tried to get back to the hotel as quickly as we could, but all the boutiques were open late. They were all having little shindigs. Mont Blanc, which is just beside the hotel we stayed in, had this massive projection up the front of it as if it was a big nightclub. Yeah, it was a really good night. Everybody seemed to enjoy themselves. All the different places that were open, everything went very well. There was no negativity. Everything was massively positive. I managed to get a good sleep. We managed to get up early on a Friday morning.
We had one big tasking for the last day on Friday, which was a recording with Vacheron, but that was in the early afternoon. So before that, we took a chance to visit some of the so-called pirates, and we made our way to Borge, which had a very hearty collection of many independent brands showing their wares, and we got to see some rather cool stuff.
When we go across to Watches and Wonders, we focus on the brands that have made appointments with us, that send us press releases, that work with us across the year, trying to pay it back a little bit because they spend a lot of time and energy on us. And we're just a couple of little Scottish guys messing about with a microphone here. But on the Friday, we had a bit of a clear schedule. We had one recording to do, and the rest of the day was pretty easy-ozy. The first person I met up with was the owner of Deluxe. They started out a number of years ago doing custom watch straps, and then it has just taken off from there. The guy there knew I was coming. He's one of Philologus's good friends, and he had put together a custom strap, not just one, actually two straps for my UN Freak X, because I didn't like the original one, and the one that I got off eBay, it was slightly too big, and it was not the greatest of quality, being £8. I didn't think it quite matched and married up with the watch itself. It's a bit like putting retread budget tyres on your Ferrari, not the done thing. So he was there, and within a minute, he had changed things over. I filmed it, and the new watch strap is absolutely phenomenal. It has got curved ends. It matches perfectly. It's the right size. It's 21mm, so it matches the watch. It's got a lip round the side of the strap, and the party trick is, if you flip it round to the other side, it has got not a magnetic locking clasp, but a spring-loaded one. So that is never going to accidentally open up. And when you actually pop it open and look inside, it says Deluxe in it. So everything is superb, amazing fit. It's cut to size. He measured my wrist. He put it all together. You got all the details right 100%. And the other strap that I got with it is quite similar, but it's got some red stitching. Again, it's full rubber, not leather, and it's got the usual tang buckle on the end of it. So fantastic work there. Check the show notes for more details on Deluxe.
In the same room was Armand from Sartori Ballard, who we last saw over in Dubai. Great to catch up with him. I always forget what a tall, handsome gentleman he is, showing off a few of his very special pieces.
Dave, did you notice a tremor when I was getting my new strap fitted?
I did. I felt herpes in the air again, and we turned round. And who had joined us? Nico again, this time looking like an extra, possibly out of Peaky Blinders, more likely out of a Bruins annual, but he was there nonetheless. Also, there was someone else there from the other side of the Atlantic.
Yeah, Roman Scharf from Luxury Bazaar had turned up. Then it was up the stairs to see the guys at HYT, where they seem to have been slashing the prices. They have changed the models, they have refined things, they have reduced the size of certain things, and they have brought that price point tumbling down.
Now, when we say tumbling down, still pretty punchy, 49,000 Swiss francs, so we're not talking inexpensive here, but down considerably from the nearer 80,000 they were previously. Much cleaner, simpler looking, very easy to read now, but still using all of that NASA-based technology with fluids and little pumps and all sorts of gizmos and gadgets. I really like the look of these. I especially like their proprietary strap change system, which, albeit proprietary, you won't be fitting any aftermarket straps to these watches. It is very cool and works very well. So yes, some interesting things to see from the guys at HYT.
Chloe then took us by the hand back down to see a guy that not only runs one brand or two brands, potentially 3 or 4 brands. The guys behind SpaceOne, Nevada Gretchen, Volcane, and I'm sure there's some other ones. He was there showcasing all these different brands, and it was just amazing to see so much creativity in the one place across things from 40, 50 years ago, right the way through to present day and futuristic stuff. The new SpaceOne that got announced, this is something else.
Astronomic things going on there. So you have the time telling, but you also have the sun, the moon, and the earth. In fact, you have the earth that takes a full year to rotate round the dial as it traverses around the sun, with obviously the moon traversing around the earth every 29.5 days. So you'll need to be keeping your eye on that for a long time to see it do anything, albeit it also tells the time in a relatively regular fashion. Titanium case looks quite space-aged, doesn't really look like it's copied anything else, it has to be said, and going to be coming in again in and around that £3,000 mark.
So many brands were there. Baltic were there, got to speak to them. There were lots of indies. We just didn't have the time. We were supposed to get picked up to be taken away to meet the guys at Backs and Strauss, a British brand based down in London, very well to do with diamonds and jewellery and things like that, making some good moves in the watch world. We didn't have the time because we get the call to head straight to Pal Expo to set things up early for our next recording and our final recording of the week.
A recording with Vacheron Constantin, the hat trick, number 3. We are now getting very familiar with these guys. Every year we catch up with them at Watches and Wonders to see how their last year's releases have done, and just as importantly, or more importantly, what they're doing this year and into the future. So in with Christian, a lot of setup to be done, cameras, miking up, and then we got in and about it, so to speak. We had a nice room to use, the acoustics weren't too terrible, and that episode will be coming to your ears and hopefully a visual feast in the not too distant future.
Not going to ruin that episode for you ahead of time, but all the latest releases were talked about, including something with the most complications that you have probably ever seen in your life. That was it. That was the end of our show. Apart from, we managed to stop by TAG. We caught up with Lauren, one of the organisers of the event for all the people that come across from the UK. She took us round the booth, showed us all the watches. We'd done the keynote earlier, but we hadn't been to the booth to actually check things out because it was jam-packed. TAG is a watch company that everybody knows about, and up until maybe 4 years ago, I think they were seen as entry point to luxury, especially here in the UK. It's a high street brand, people know who it is, and it's seen as a bit of a stepping stone. I don't think that's the case any longer, especially over the last couple of years, since they've started doing things like the nanograph, which I fell in love with a number of years ago, and the way things have developed, moved forward. Now you've got Julian at the helm of it as the CEO. You've got fantastic brand ambassadors. You don't have Leonardo DiCaprio kind of holding a watch oddly. You've got Ryan Gosling kicking ass on the stage at the Oscars wearing a watch that people know what it is. So it was good to go around there, check out the new Monaco, the new releases, and then it was time to pack up our stuff and get our asses out of there. And our recap, we quickly covered it slightly on the last show, the fact that this is a trade and press and retail event. If you went as a punter, don't expect to wear the watches. We went over that, compare it to a car show. We also said don't listen to influencers, bloggers, YouTube guys, TikTokers that turn up going, this is going to be amazing, we're going to try every single watch that ever exists on right now, and then they didn't, and then they turned around and told you it was a shit show. Not the case. My recap, and I'll let Dave talk after me, is that 22 was probably the killer year because it was the year just after the pandemic. It started to kind of dissipate a bit. People were travelling, all the heavy hitting watches had been collected for a couple of years, and boom, out they came. 23 was good, but it wasn't as crazy as 22. We didn't have the 222 from Vacheron. We didn't have the Kodo from Grand Seiko. It was a little bit more subdued. And then this year was kind of the same. I mean, last year you had the funny colours from Rolex, but that was about it. And this year was quite similar to last year. This year could be compared to 2018 or 2019. Think of a standout explosive watch from those years. You probably really can't. It was just a normal year with normal releases. And think about it, your favourite artist, singer, actor, actress, not every single year do they release their best album, their best single, their best movie. It doesn't happen. The fact we came out the pandemic with such a kick because we've been capped up for so long and couldn't do anything meant that the expectation levels were extremely high. We've returned to the norm. This was a great watch show. This was up. The amount of people, brands and watches that came out was up compared to last year, up compared to the year before. but people were taking pot shots at it and saying that it wasn't good. You just need to understand how the world works, and you cannot have the best of the best every single time. It's just not a sustainable thing. This was a great event. I enjoyed it thoroughly. We met more people than we ever have. We saw more brands than we ever have. We saw more watches than we ever have. And we got more content than we ever have. So just because somebody on YouTube didn't get in on the press days, went on the public day and didn't like it, don't let that put you off, and don't let that mar your judgment of how great a show this was. So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, and we'll catch you guys again soon.